Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the podcast. As always, I'm your host Tudor, and thank you for joining me each Wednesday to discuss various topics. Now, as a bit of a forewarning, this week's episode will delve a bit into what goes behind the scenes of this podcast, so if you're not particularly interested, or if you, let's say, rather leave this kind of part of it mysterious, feel free to skip this episode. But for those of you who are still here, thank you for joining. I think this episode will be a bit rambly, but I just wanted to clarify, a few things that I feel are important in relation to the podcast and about me in general, to be honest. So, for the more astute of you, I think you've noticed that last week there wasn't an episode. Well, there is something about that I wanted to discuss. It was inevitable in a way that we were going to have an episode that's going to be a bit, let's say, meta, in a sense. It's all down to how hard it is to do this. And I know it comes from a pretty privileged place, I am more than certain. In the sense that, from your end, obviously, it looks pretty, simple. Once a week, there's a 10-15 minute episode, some tidbits, something interesting to hear about, a small update on how I'm doing, and that's it, right? Well, again, I'm not trying to sound pompous or anything, but there is a lot of work that does go in the behind the scenes to make this happen, to be honest. I try to do my research on pretty much every topic that I cover, and that takes most of the week, to be honest. I try to choose something to talk about that I feel will be interesting, something that I'm also interested in, to be honest, because there's no point in me talking about things that only I would be interested in. And also, I think what I try to do is to choose subjects that have a main takeaway, at least. So not something that you learn about, you're like, okay, that's interesting information, but that's about it. No, I do try to choose things that could result in something actionable most of the time. Or if not, at least they try to serve, let's say, a bigger purpose. And, that takes time. And also, starting from, episode 5 onwards, I pretty much gave up trying to speak free form, as I realized that on more than one occasion I can be quite rambly. This episode perhaps the best proof. But the idea is that I felt that in order to better deliver on the topics that I wanted to cover, it would be a lot more beneficial if I had, let's say, a script to follow. So what I usually end up doing, as I said, is that I first do my research on what I want to cover. After that follows a pretty big period of time, a few days, definitely a lot of hours, in which I start writing, usually in a Word document, but now I try to use some apps to help me, and basically try to write a full script of everything that I will want to say in the episode. So, there is an initial phase where I'll either record myself once and then do a revision in, script format, and then say the same thing again for the podcast itself. Or what I've even done more recently is that I simply skip that first step and try to write the script first, and then do a recording and obviously a revision of that recording afterwards. Now, these methods are, still new to me as well. Again, I don't have that many episodes under my belt, so it's still something that I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to follow extensively. And to be honest, this brings me to where I wanted to go. So for last week's episode, I admit that I had a full week to prepare, and I simply couldn't, find a topic that I really wanted to discuss about. Call it writer's block. Maybe I was occupied with some other things. Maybe I simply didn't have the drive that I needed. Maybe I was weighed down with other things. Essentially, I woke up on the day of the recording feeling that I have no topic to discuss. I have no motivation to actually do that episode, and especially dreading the idea of trying to write newspaper style, on the clock until the day ends. So I simply decided at the last moment, like I literally 1 or 2 hours before midnight, that I won't do the episode. And I felt awful afterwards. It feels like one of the biggest struggles in my life in general is the fact that I feel that I do not, have consistency in what I do. One of the biggest complaints that I feel I get from other people and from myself as well is that I simply do not have, a strict schedule, or at least deep drive, motivation, whatever you want to call it, to actually take things for the long haul, so to speak. And for me, I really felt that this podcast was the first time I could in my personal life say that I've started something that I actually kept with some regularity. Well, not just some regularity, let's be fair. It's literally been a weekly endeavor that has worked quite well. But now I feel that that cycle is technically broken, and it would be, I won't lie, I've felt, including until I record this podcast right now, including feelings of giving it up all completely. But I keep trying to remind myself why I set out to do this in the first place. I really want to get into shape. I really want, when I reach 30 years, to actually feel, like I've found some kind of purpose in my life and a reason to basically continue doing what I do. Feel like I'm working towards something. And I felt that this podcast is what I've been looking for. It's just that, I don't know. I think I've perhaps jumped the shark a bit on many of the things that I shouldn't have, let's say, in the sense that I've tried to be as professional as possible about the podcast from the beginning, in the sense that whilst I do not have other previous experience doing podcasts myself, I have listened to a lot of podcasts and I develop my tastes, and I know what sounds good in a podcast, what doesn't, how a good podcast should look like. And I think I did the mistake of trying to reach all of the things that I perceive as being, the hallmark of a good podcast from the beginning. And perhaps I've set too high of an expectation to myself, in the sense that maybe it is okay to not have the podcast be perfectly once a week at the same time and all that. Although, to be fair, the time has not been a strong suit of the podcast until now either. But at least the day of the week has been. Maybe it's okay that I don't do it weekly. Or if I do it weekly, it doesn't have to always be on the same day. Maybe I don't need to have a perfect script each time, like I'm basically reciting a news article or something like that. Maybe it's okay to be a bit more freeform about it. And, that'll give me the chance to also develop my, let's say, live speaking in a way. But for me, again, I feel that I've also been, if not constrained, at least a bit pressured to try to find similar topics, so to speak. Like I felt in the beginning that, okay, I think this podcast should focus a lot, since in the end, the uniting theme is obviously my fitness progress and everything, that maybe this should be about fitness articles, so to speak, or fitness topics. But then I realized, okay, but whilst obviously my fitness is important for me, it is not necessarily my, let's say, main preoccupation in my daily life. And there are so many other things that interest me that do not necessarily belong in fitness category. So that's why you probably noticed that I also released a lot of episodes that relate to psychology one way or another. So either biases or various, let's say, trappings that are commonly known in the psychological world, but most likely unknown to most people, and therefore, in my opinion, things that should be of interest. And then, of course, lately, especially as I've become a lot more introspective, as I said, about what I wish to achieve from this podcast and from my life in general, you've seen a lot of philosophical, let's say, themed podcasts as well. And that's fine. Again, I do not believe that what I've done until now is wrong in any way, or let's say exaggeration or lie about what I feel and what I do, let's say on a daily basis. Like, those episodes are true, so to speak. But I do feel that perhaps I've strived a bit too much to become some kind of an educational podcast, when really, again, I think I'm trying too much to exclude myself almost from the episodes that I produce. Like, I give so much, let's say, factual information, but I kind of forget to, give my opinions as well on the subjects that I discuss and on what they mean to me in actuality. So I think for now what I'm going to try to do, but again, I think it's healthy to just not have a lot of expectations. General is that I'll simply try to speak each week about things that I feel interest me one way or another. And if that is something that you, the listener, are also into, that's great. If not, well, I'm willing to take that risk, because again, I feel it will just raise the risk of me again reaching in this kind of point that I reached last week, in the sense that if I do not strive to just be perfectly natural and myself in these episodes, I just feel that I'm going to put too high expectations myself and risk losing any drive of doing this podcast at all. And again, perhaps me trying to go too professional with it too fast is just making it too unsustainable in the long term. So, I guess from now on you should expect to see me a bit more like I was in the first episodes. Me just saying what I actually feel, let's say, about various things. Again, I don't want to promise certain topics or anything, but of course, if any of you have anything that you'd like to hear, I'm more than open to suggestions, because again, whilst I don't want it necessarily to be audience driven, I do care about each and every one of you that are listening, even though I might not know you. So I am more than happy to find out new things from you that you'd like to hear about, and in the process learn about them myself as well. So yeah, I think that's about it at a glance, let's say. So hopefully that explains a bit my absence from last week, and will explain, I guess, a bit of a shift that's going to happen in the content that I'll be releasing. And especially regarding the schedule, I'll repeat it again, I really don't want to set any expectations. For now, I would like to try, just like this episode, to keep it on each Wednesday of the week, but I'll have to see how I feel about it, to be honest. I really, really do not want to, set things up just for them to not materialize, I guess. But in any case, if we are to move on to what will be always a staple of any episode, I guess, namely my fitness progress, I was, and that was also one of the reasons, I guess, for last week's slight, lack of motivation, was that indeed last week I did put on 200 grams, which again, it doesn't sound like a lot, but from my point of view, what is more important is that it's just another week, let's say, of no progress and regress, in the sense that it's something that I'll need to recover at some point down the road if I want to lose enough weight by the time I reach 30. This week I did lose 900 grams, but again, you have to consider those 900 grams as being those, whatever was last week minus 200. So it's actually just, a net loss of 700 grams. And since I've calculated that from now on, I should be striving for about 750 grams lost per week if I want to reach my goal. Yeah, so I am quite a bit behind, since last week we can consider, a 0, and this week just a 700 gram loss, which does bring me down to 113.1 kilograms, which is about 31% of the way to the goal. So, also my, let's say, macro indicators, body fat, total body water, and muscle mass are looking better than 2 weeks ago. And I did continue, and I guess this is also part of the thing that was frustrating me. I have continued running quite regularly, and I've been also on a pretty challenging hike last Saturday. So in a way, I am surprised that I am not seeing better results. But again, this is, as I said, sport can only help so much. It's still, in my case, I've had a few days of clear overeating. No, there's no way about it. And those were namely last Wednesday, which again was quite strongly correlated, let's say, with my lack of motivation with the podcast and the depression that followed afterwards. And this Monday as well, because most likely I was very, let's say, famished from the activities of the weekend. And Monday was also a pretty hard day to abstain from eating, let's say. So again, I just need to renew my efforts. I did pay a visit to my local, sports shop, and I did get some new running shoes. So hopefully those will help a bit more with running on asphalt at my weight. Let's see how that will go. Although I'm also really acutely aware that the first few runs in the new pair of shoes will no doubt be, still training exercise, so to speak. So again, I'm trying to be a lot more understanding with myself from this point of view. So yeah, I guess this does really sum up the episode. As always, if you want to follow the podcast and know when the episodes are released, especially if the schedule might change in the future, you can go to Twitter or Facebook, which are both linked in the episode description. Also, if you are interested in discussing in general about this episode, again, with other episodes would be discussing about the subject, but I guess here you can go even more meta than I did and discuss about me discussing about the podcast on Reddit, which is also included in the description. Also, if you have topic suggestions, as I said earlier, you can go to the email address for the podcast. So yeah, thank you so much for continuing to listen to the show, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.